Monterey Bay, California, 2012. A pod of killer whales has spent hours running down a gray whale and her calf. It is exhausting, methodical work, and eventually it ends the way these things usually end. The calf is killed. What happens next is the part nobody could explain. Two enormous animals had been sitting at the edge of the attack the entire time, not participating, not feeding, just there, watching. And when the killing was over, they moved in. Not to scavenge. They charged the orcas, trumpeting through their blowholes, throwing their bodies around, driving the most efficient predator in the ocean off a meal it had just spent hours earning. And here is the detail that makes it strange. The animals doing the chasing had nothing to do with the gray whale. They were not related to it. They were not the same species. They could not eat a single bite of what they were defending. They stayed for hours afterward, guarding a carcass they had no use for. For years, incidents like this were treated as flukes, odd behavior, anecdotes from whale-watching boats. Then somebody decided to actually count them, and the pattern that came back rewrote how we understand the ocean's food chain. Killer whales are being driven off their kills, consistently, worldwide, across decades. And the animal doing it is one nobody would have guessed. To appreciate how odd that is, you have to remember what an orca is. This is an animal that hunts great white sharks, that coordinates in family groups to drown blue whales, that teaches its young to launch onto beaches after sea lions and wriggle back into the surf. It has one of the largest brains on the planet, and it hunts on culture rather than instinct. Nothing preys on it, nothing kills it. There is no animal alive that hunts a killer whale. Which means whatever is doing, this is not a predator. It is something else, and the ocean has no obvious category for it. Chapter 1. The Suspects. Before the answer, run the process of elimination, because it tells you how unlikely the real answer is. Suspect 1. The great white shark. The obvious choice. 5 meters of muscle, teeth designed for one purpose, the most feared fish alive. Except we can rule it out immediately because the relationship runs the other direction. Off South Africa, orcas have learned to flip great whites onto their backs, hold them until they suffocate, and remove the liver with something close to surgical precision. Great whites have abandoned entire stretches of coastline for months after orcas move in. The great white is not challenging anybody. The great white is on the menu. Suspect 2. The pilot whale. Better candidate. In 2015, off southern Iceland, researchers documented pilot whales actively pursuing killer whales and forcing them to leave. They travel in schools, numbering in the hundreds, and they use a strategy called mobbing, gathering into a coordinated wall and charging. That is real. It is documented, but it is regional. It happens between two roughly comparable animals, and the pilot whales are defending themselves. Suspect 3. The sperm whale. Now we are talking about a genuine giant, 60 feet long, weighing more than 5 times what an orca weighs, teeth up to 8 inches. Adult males are effectively immune to predation by virtue of size alone. When orcas approach a group, the females form a defensive formation around the calves with their tails ready to strike, and orcas generally do not push it. But sperm whales defend. They do not intervene. Their whole strategy is to make themselves too expensive to attack and then go back to hunting squid a mile beneath the surface. They are not chasing anybody down. So many of these fit what happened in Monterey Bay. What we are looking for is an animal that shows up to fights. It was never invited to. On behalf of animals it is not related to, for no food it can eat. And it has to be big enough that a pod of orcas decides the fight is not worth having. The answer is a whale famous for singing. Chapter 2: The least likely animal in the ocean. It is the humpback whale. Up to 50 feet long, up to 80,000 pounds, no teeth. It eats krill and small schooling fish by filtering enormous mouthfuls of seawater. Its reputation is gentleness. It is the whale on the poster, the one people take boats out to see, the one that sings. It is the last animal you would put in a fight. And it is the only animal known to routinely and deliberately attack killer whales. Take the case that made this famous. April 12, 2022, in the Salish Sea off Vancouver Island. A 5-year-old humpback, catalogued by researchers under the name Valiant, was surrounded by 9 big killer whales from 2 different hunting families, 9 mammal-eating orcas working together against 1 juvenile whale. That should be the end of the story. It was not. Valiant did not run. Valiant went after them. For roughly 20 minutes, witnesses on 2 separate whale-watching boats watched a young humpback trail, harass, and confront a pod of killer whales, rolling, trumpeting, which is a loud, aggressive blast through the blowhole, surfacing in the middle of them. One naturalist with 22 years on the water said flatly that he had never seen anything like it. And this was not beginner's luck. Valiant had done it before. In 2019, at just 2 years old, Valiant was recorded chasing off a group of big orcas in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. In 2021, when a large orca began shoving Valiant while younger animals tried to force their way on top, Valiant drove them off again. A 2-year-old whale chasing killer whales, twice more by age 5. Which raises the obvious question: is this one unusually stubborn animal, or is this a species-wide behavior nobody had properly measured? Chapter 3: 62 Years of Evidence. A NOAA researcher named Robert Pittman witnessed one of these interventions and could not stop thinking about it. So he started asking around. Other scientists, whale watch operators, anyone who had seen humpbacks tangle with orcas. The accounts kept coming. Eventually, he and his co-authors had assembled 115 documented interactions, reported by more than 50 observers, spanning 62 years, from 1951 to 2012, from ocean basins all over the world. The results were published in Marine Mammal Science, and they are worth going through carefully because the real numbers are stranger than the version that usually gets repeated. First finding. In 95% of these interactions, the killer whales involved were mammal-eating populations, not the fish-eaters. The humpbacks were not reacting to killer whales in general. They were reacting specifically to the ones that hunt other mammals. Second finding, and this is the one that changes everything. Humpbacks initiated the majority of these encounters, 57%. They were not being cornered and fighting back. They were showing up. And when humpbacks approached killer whales, the orcas were almost always already engaged. In at least 87% of those cases, the killer whales were in the middle of attacking or feeding on prey. Which means the humpbacks were not wandering into these situations by accident. They were arriving at hunts in progress. Third finding. When humpbacks interfered with an attack, only 11% of the prey being defended were humpbacks. 89% were something else entirely. 10 other species, 3 kinds of cetacean, 6 kinds of seal and sea lion, and 1 bony fish. Read that again. In nearly 9 out of 10 documented interventions, the humpback was defending an animal that was not a humpback, was not related to it, and could offer it absolutely nothing in return. The authors concluded that this was mobbing behavior, and they raised a possibility that most scientists are extremely reluctant to put in print. Interspecific altruism, helping a member of another species at a cost to yourself. Chapter 4. Fins full of barnacles. So how does a filter feeder fight an apex predator? Start with the weapon. The humpback's pectoral fins are the longest of any animal on Earth, reaching up to 16 feet, nearly a third of the whale's body length in each fin. And they are not smooth. Humpbacks carry heavy colonies of barnacles, particularly along the leading edges of the fins and around the tail. Hard, sharp, calcified plates cemented to the skin, which turns a swimming limb into something closer to a club wrapped in broken glass. A humpback swinging a pectoral fin is delivering tons of force through an edge covered in abrasive shell. The tail does similar work. A humpback fluke slapped down on the surface produces a concussive impact you can hear from a distance. Then there is the sound. Trumpeting is not singing. It is a harsh, forceful blast through the blowhole, described by observers as a snort scaled up to the size of a bus, and it is associated with aggression. In several documented incidents, whales trumpeting near boats have been loud enough that people felt it through the hull. And there is the body itself. 80,000 pounds is a lot of animal to move out of the way. Humpbacks have been recorded positioning themselves physically between orcas and their target, and simply staying there, not attacking, just blocking and refusing to move. There is one more advantage, and it is the quiet one. A humpback does not need to win. It needs to be inconvenient. An orca's entire life depends on staying physically intact. It hunts by outswimming and outmaneuvering fast prey. And an injury that slows it down is not a bad week. It is a serious problem. A torn fin or a deep muscle injury from a barnacle-covered limb swung by a 40-ton animal is a cost no orca wants to absorb over a seal. So the humpback does not have to kill anything. It only has to raise the price of the meal above what the meal is worth. That turns out to be enough, which is why these encounters, for all their violence, so rarely end with anything actually dying. Chapter 5. The Seal on the Belly. Now the individual cases, because the statistics do not capture how deliberate some of this looks. Off Antarctica, researchers watched killer whales trying to wash a Weddell seal off an ice floe. This is one of the most sophisticated hunting techniques in the animal kingdom. The orcas swim at the floe in a coordinated line, timing their movements precisely to drive a wave up and over the ice, sweeping the seal into the water where they can take it. Every member of the group has to commit at the same instant, or the wave never forms. The seal, running out of options, swam toward two humpbacks that had positioned themselves nearby. One of the humpbacks rolled onto its back. The seal was swept by a wave onto the whale's upturned chest, between the pectoral fins, and when the seal began sliding off, the humpback used a fin to push it back up onto its own body out of reach of the orcas. That is not a reflex. That is not a whale being startled. That is a corrective adjustment made in real time to keep another animal alive. Elsewhere, humpbacks have been recorded intervening on behalf of grey whale calves, sea lions, harbour seals, and an ocean sunfish. Pause on that last one. An ocean sunfish is a large flat disc of a fish that drifts near the surface, poses no threat to anything, and has no relationship whatsoever with whales. It is about as distant from a humpback as an animal can be, while still living in the same water. A humpback stepped in anyway. And in the Monterey Bay incident we started with, the humpbacks stayed with the grey whale calf's carcass for hours after the orcas had gone, in what looked for all the world like a guard being mounted over a body they could not eat. Chapter 6. Why would they do this? Here is where the science gets appropriately uncomfortable, because there are two explanations, and they lead to very different places. The unsentimental one first, and it is probably the stronger. Killer whales do hunt humpbacks. Specifically, they hunt humpback calves. In the study, when mammal-eating orcas approached humpbacks, they attacked 85% of the time, and they targeted calves exclusively. So a humpback has a serious, permanent, lifelong reason to hate killer whales. Many carry the rake marks to prove it, sets of parallel scars from orca teeth, usually acquired during attacks in the first year of life. Surveys of these scars suggest a large share of humpbacks were attacked as calves and survived, which means an enormous number of adult humpbacks are swimming around carrying the physical evidence of the worst day of their lives, inflicted by an animal they will keep encountering for the next 60 years. Now consider how a humpback finds out an attack is happening. It hears it. Killer whale hunting calls travel a long way underwater, and so do the sounds of a mammal being attacked. A humpback hears those sounds and cannot tell who is being attacked. It only knows that killer whales are hunting nearby, and killer whales hunting nearby is a threat to every calf in the area, including any of its own. So it goes. It arrives, and whatever it finds, seal, sea lion, grey whale calf, sunfish, it drives the orcas off anyway. Under this reading, the altruism is a side effect. The humpback is enforcing a rule that serves its own species, and other animals benefit from being in the blast radius. It is not kindness, it is territorial defense, with a very generous definition of territory. But the researchers were careful not to close the door on the second explanation, and the reason is one specific piece of evidence. Cost. Mobbing is not free. These interventions can last hours. Humpbacks have been documented traveling considerable distances toward the sound of an attack. That is energy spent, risk taken, and time lost by an animal that gains no food, no mate, and no territory from it. If the behavior were purely a mistake, a case of responding to an alarm that turns out not to concern you, you might expect it to stop once the whale arrives and sees a seal instead of a calf. It does not stop. The humpbacks commit anyway, over and over, across 62 years and every ocean where the two species meet. The honest position, and the one the researchers themselves took, is that we do not know. It might be misfiring instinct. It might be something more. The data cannot yet separate them. Chapter 7. What this actually changes. Step back from the whales for a moment, because the implication here is bigger than one species being unexpectedly aggressive. The food chain, we were taught, is a pyramid. Apex predator on top, everything arranged beneath it, and the only relationship that matters is who eats whom. That model has no room for what humpbacks are doing. They are not competing with orcas. They do not eat the same food. They are not defending territory in any meaningful sense. They are not protecting their own offspring in the vast majority of documented cases. They are simply, repeatedly, showing up and ruining hunts. And the ecological consequences are real. A seal that would have died lives. A grey whale calf that would have been taken is not. Somewhere across the world's oceans, a running total of animals exist right now because a whale that could not eat them decided to intervene. There is a second consequence too, and it is easy to miss. Humpback populations have recovered substantially in many regions since commercial whaling ended, which means there are far more of these animals in the water now than there were a century ago. If humpbacks reliably disrupt mammal-eating orca hunts, then their recovery is quietly reshaping the odds for every animal those orcas hunt, an entire predator-prey relationship adjusted by a third party that has no stake in the outcome. The orca remains the most capable predator alive. Nothing has changed about that. Nothing hunts it, nothing kills it, and in a straight contest, it beats almost anything in the sea. But being the best hunter is not the same as having a free hand. There is something in the water that will hear you working, cross open ocean to reach you and take your dinner away. Not because it wants the meal, because it has decided that you are not going to have it. And you cannot fight it because it is bigger than you and its fins are covered in shell. You cannot outlast it because it has nothing at stake and can afford to stay all afternoon. You cannot even eat it because it is 40 tons of animal you were never equipped to kill. You can only leave. Chapter 8. The thing nobody expected. So, what are killer whales running from? Not a bigger predator. There is not one. Not a rival, not a monster, not anything hiding in deep water. They are running from a toothless filter feeder with barnacles on its fins that arrives uninvited and refuses to leave. That is the answer, and it is deeply unsatisfying if what you wanted was a bigger set of teeth. It is far more interesting if you wanted to understand how the ocean actually works. Because it turns out the top of the food chain is not a throne. It is a job, and the orca does that job under conditions it does not fully control. In water, it shares with an animal that has appointed itself, for reasons we still cannot fully explain, the thing that shows up when the killing starts. 115 documented interactions, 62 years, every ocean. 89% of them on behalf of somebody else. Chapter 9. Before you go. If that landed, do me a favor, leave a like, because it genuinely helps this reach other people who find this stuff as strange as I do. Then settle the argument in the comments, because the scientists have not. Are humpbacks defending other species on purpose, or is this an anti-predator instinct misfiring in the most beautiful possible way? I want to hear which side you come down on and why. And if you want more of the parts of the natural world that refuse to behave the way the textbooks say, subscribe and stick around. Thanks for watching.